it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Charleston, could you certify a quorum?
Yes, sir. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges, Dr. McGraw,
Here.
Charles City County, Mr. Atkins,
Present.
Mr. Coda, Chesterfield County Chair Carroll,
Present.
Mr. Winslow, Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhour,
Here.
Ms. Lascolette, Hanover County, Mr. Peterson,
Here.
Mr. Davis, Henrico County, Mr. Thornton,
Here.
Ms. O'Bannon, New Kent County, Ms. Page,
Here.
Mr. Lockwood, Powhatan County, Mr. Byerly, Mr. McClung,
Here.
City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney,
Here.
Mr. Jones, Virginia House of Delegates, Delegate Robinson, Senate of Virginia, Senator Hashmi. Here. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Miller.
Present, thank you.
GRTC, Ms. Adams, Ms. Torres.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Dean, DRPT, Mr. Brule, Mr. Trogdon, VDOT, Mr. Britch, Mr. Totten,
Here.
Mr. Riblett,
Here.
Virginia Port Authority, Mr. Edwards, Ms. Vick, Ms. Nelson.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. We do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I do need to read one statement, action requested. If there's any member, well, we have had one, I believe, request to participate remotely. Based on reading the email that was sent to me, I find the request to be proper. But by our bylaws, we need to bring this forward before the committee. And so if everybody's okay with Ms. Nelson participating remotely, I would accept the motion for that to happen in a second.
So moved. Second.
Motion's properly in second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Did you already?
Yes, so
Okay.
I'll update the attendance to show her present.
Very good. Moving forward on the agenda was sent out, it's been posted. Does anybody have any amendments to the agenda this morning? All right, then the agenda will be accepted. So we have the approval of the CVTA minutes from the April 28th and June 1st meetings are part of the agenda packet today. Does everybody have any questions on the proposed minutes? If not, I would accept the motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I have, who made the motion? Mayor, who second? Mr. Thornton, okay, very good. Motion's on the floor to approve approval of the minutes. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes carried. You want to do open comment?
Yes, sir. As far as I know, we do not have any requests to participate remotely or open for public comment. If there is anyone in the room that is interested in speaking, sharing public comment, now would be the time to address the committee.
All right, no one online, no one coming forward. I will close the open comment period. Chairman's report is going to be very brief. I had the opportunity to do our last part of our CVTA tour and speak for the Goochland Board of Supervisors with Chet. They had a packed house. Apparently they had a very robust agenda that night. And we appreciate the hospitality that was afforded to us by Mrs. Spoonhour and the entire Board of Supervisors in Goochland. I thought it went over well, no one booed. So we appreciate it. That was really a great honor to come before your community and have an opportunity to present about the CVTA. We've got some other things on the agenda that we're gonna talk about next that we've been working on. So we'll just move forward to the next part of the agenda, which would be the nominating committee report and organizational matters. So myself and John Hodges worked in the capacity of a nominating committee moving forward for the next chair and vice chair. And something else that you'll see in the handout that was also put forward, which we'll talk about, was a possible rotation for the finance committee moving forward for some of the smaller jurisdictions that are not an automatic part of the finance committee, which would be the big three, which is Chesterfield, Richmond, and Enrico, which are normally on the finance committee. In the process, I determined that the committee's got a recommendation for moving forward. Recommendation for, and of course, we need to open, I believe the proper portion is to open this up for nominations, is that correct? Yes, sir. So what we'll do, that I would tell you that from the nomination committee recommendation, and then we'll open it up for nominations, was for that Mayor LeVar Stoney to be the incoming chair of the CVTA, and for John Hodges to be the vice chair of the CVTA. And that's, I didn't have anybody else contact me about seeking either one of those positions. So what I'll do now is I'll open the floor for nominations for chair first. And I will start with the nomination of Mayor LeVar Stoney for chair. Do we have any other nominations from the floor?
The nominations be closed, Mr. Chairman.
Nominations have been moved to be closed. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
All right, so I have a vote to close the nominations. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes carried. We have one nomination. That means, Mayor, that you are now the chair of the CVTA. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, would you like to take over the meeting?
Guess that's what that means.
Make my work today short. I don't mind moving chairs at all.
Or you wanna just?
No, you got it, as a class. Although we'll take the name tag.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and if you don't mind, I take a point of personal privilege and just say, first, thank Mr. Carroll for his service, not just to Chesterfield County, but also to the CVTA. I think he's served more than admirably in his role, and just like your predecessor, Mr. Thornton, you've taken the authority to the next level. And it is my hope, and what will be my approach, that we take the CVTA to another higher plane. It's my belief that this is the best metro authority in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And there's a lot of reasons that will, I think, defend that statement. And a lot of it is due to the work that we do together in a collaborative fashion, putting the region first. And so that's exactly what I will do under my tenure as the chair of this august authority, as said by my predecessor, Mr. Thornton. So thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you, sir.
I guess now we'll open up the nominations for vice chair of the authority. Nominations are open.
I nominate John Hodges.
There's a nomination for John Hodges, the vice chair of Ashland, the town of Ashland. Any more nominations?
Those nominations be closed, Mr. Chair.
Nominations have been closed. Is there a
Motion to close.
is there a motion to close?
He motioned it, I second it.
Seconded. Voice vote. Those in favor of Mr. Hodges as vice chair, signify by saying aye.
Close the motion to close the nominations.
Oh, I thought we already,
We had the motion to close, we gotta vote on that and then vote on that.
okay.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay. Motion to close the nominations has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Now, there's a motion to approve Mr. Hodges as the vice chair of the authority. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Hodges. Congratulations, Ashland.
Mr. Chair, I will say that in my capacity as chair, Mr. Hodges did in fact send me a letter that he stating that he would in fact accept the nomination.
Good.
I didn't want him to think like you're not here, so guess what?
I have the letter. I have the letter.
That's the letter? Okay.
Yes.
We got proof. Now we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, the assessment of the Finance Committee rotation structure. Mr. Parsons?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this is item B2 on page 23 in the agenda packet. And I will wade into this and then lean on legal counsel to provide any clarification. Page 23, we're looking at actually a series of 3 proposed additions to the non-binding governance documents, guidance documents that the CVTA has developed. And these are all related to Finance Committee membership. The first one on page 23 is oriented towards having 2 members appointed to the Finance Committee by the authority representing the jurisdictions with lower populations, and such appointments should rotate among those members in alphabetical order. So Mr. Carroll had mentioned this. There was a loose handout table with a green header that showed a number of different rotation options. I think what the authority should focus on is the second column that says Finance Committee. This was the proposed rotation that was developed by, I believe, Mr. Hodges, Mr. Carroll, to rotate through, and that's what should be considered under this first guidance document. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to take individual action, or should I go through all 3? And then
I think you should go through all 3.
so that's the first, is setting the rotation amongst the members, and those members would be Hanover, New Kent, Powhatan, Ashland, Charles City, and Goochland. The second guidance item is on page 24, and this is related to length of term. So the 2 members appointed to the Finance Committee by the authority should serve terms of 2 years, commencing on July 1st of each fiscal year or upon appointment, and ending on July 30th of the second year following the date of appointment. So that's establishment of a 2-year term for those members of the Finance Committee. And I think this is a result of I think an astute observation by Mr. Peterson that once you're appointed to the Finance Committee, if you haven't done it before, there's a learning curve and it takes some time. So rotating off after 1 year was a challenge and prevented some lack of continuity amongst the Finance Committee members.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I think that for clarification too, the 2 appointees under this plan, I believe, though, are not appointed in the same year, so that there is no overlap.
That's right, yes. Okay, and then the last guidance item on page 25 is the establishment of a little background. As you know, Mr. Brown served as a member of the Finance Committee when the authority was organized. Since that organization rotated off, but there was some interest in keeping the authority's CTB member committed and connected to the Finance Committee. So this is a provision that the authority's CTB member should be included as an ex officio non-voting advisory member of the Finance Committee on a regular rotation. So it doesn't affect the 5 members. The CTB member will be added as a 6th member ex officio. Non-voting, yes. So that's those are the 3 items. Any additional
I would just,
context, Mr.
thank you, Ms. Parsons. I would just add, Mr. Chairman, members of the body, that these are non-binding governance documents, very explicitly stated. And you'll note that the language says should represent or should serve or should be included. So it provides guidance. It doesn't bind the hands of the body, so you can choose to abide by these or not on a case-by-case basis, but it just sets forth a structure if you choose to proceed that way.
And Mr. Gregory, I was gonna ask on behalf of the authority, why we can go this route with the guiding documents and not have to amend the bylaws.
Well, of course, you could amend the bylaws to incorporate these as more heavily binding policies, like the bylaws are. But these are, I think the idea was to allow for some flexibility, because there could be circumstances where you may need to make changes, or the body may not wanna comply with the policies, and so if that's the body's pleasure, if you wanna incorporate it into the bylaws, we could go in that direction, but these are, we were tasked with drafting them as non-binding governance documents, so that's what we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair. I think that the thought behind it, quite frankly, was that, especially in election years, things can change and the members of the body can change. And you may get someone coming in from whose seat is slated for rotation that may go, look, I got a lot of stuff going on, I don't want to be in that position, or I do. And it just allows for flexibility for the group. It doesn't tie the hands of incoming members from being able to pivot and say, we're gonna make a change. When I got elected years ago, I was up to serve as the chair for the Tri-Cities TPO. And I'm like, first day, I'm like, I think I'd be more comfortable if someone else did it. So I just wanted to make sure there was still flexibility for the organization. And that's why we looked at doing the non-binding as opposed to doing a bylaws amendment.
And per that flexibility, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the spreadsheet that you have before you does not show the smaller jurisdictions serving 2-year terms, a single-year term. So if you adopt the guidance document, we can make that adjustment per the flexibility.
Yeah, in that vein, Mr. Gregory, can you give some real life examples here so folks are not confused?
Many of you have experience with the RRTPO and the and Plan RVA boards, right? So there have been circumstances in those boards and in other boards where they have rotations of officers that they try to abide by pursuant to guidance documents that they follow. Or some of those are in their bylaws, but there have been circumstances, as Mr. Carroll just described, where someone is newly elected, or somebody loses a primary or loses their election, and then somebody new comes in and they're not familiar with the regional body. They're not, and they're poised per the schedule to take over, say, as chairman or vice chairman or a committee leadership post. And they don't feel capable, they don't feel prepared, they don't feel interested perhaps in serving in that role. So those kinds of things do happen with these kinds of bodies. So it's a real world policy, basically, is what it is.
Flexibility.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the non-binding documents?
Mr. Chair, I'd make that motion to adopt the non-binding documents for the CVTA.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The policies are adopted. Move on to item 3. Appointment of the CVTA Finance Committee members. We're gonna do that at another time, correct?
Yeah, this will be the remaining 2.
Oh, okay.
From the smaller jurisdiction. So we now have guidance documents.
We do have the documents. So we have the guidance documents here, in which will now allow for New Kent County and Powhatan County to be appointed. That means Ms. Page and Mr. Byerly, correct?
I'm in Charles City.
But I believe 2020, I'm sorry, I read it wrong.
I'm sorry.
You trying to skip line?
No, you clear. No, we good.
Unless you live in Hanover or New Kent or Powhatan or New Kent.
I didn't hear correctly. Move on, Mr. Chair.
So yeah, Ms. Page and Mr. Byerly. I need a motion.
Is that what's on the list?
No, sir.
Powhatan and Ashland, I believe, or
Powhatan and New Kent, right?
Powhatan, New Kent.
yes, okay.
I will make the motion.
It's been a motion.
I second.
It's been seconded. All in favor? Opposed?
Congratulations,
Those,
Ms. Page.
congratulations. Ms. Page. All right, we'll move on to section C of our agenda, which is the committee reports. First up is the CVTA Finance Committee update. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my part of this is gonna be very minimal because the items B through F are all the things we covered in our last finance committee meeting. So no sense me spending a lot of time going over those. I'm just gonna basically turn these items, all of which we addressed, over to Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Parsons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Starting on item C1B is the financial activity and investment reports. And that actually is starting on page 26 of the agenda. We have the investment reports, the monthly investment reports for April and May. And we can see that the investments of the CVTA continue to perform well. The Finance Committee at its last meeting approved reinvestment of available funds to keep these investments growing, and also had a fairly significant discussion about all the options that are available for investment of CVTA resources when projects do not dictate the use of the revenues. And we are working with Ms. Longacre from Chesterfield County to come back to the next Finance Committee meeting to have a more lengthy discussion with the committee about what those options might be and whether there's anything that is of interest to the Finance Committee to bring back to the full authority for other types of investment options. The yields that are shown are performing well, but I think the Finance Committee was just interested in learning about other possible options for investment.
Mr. Chair, if I comment, that in speaking with my treasurer, if we look out at our programming for our projects in the future, there may be some projects that the money may not need to be released for a longer period of time. And if that's the case, it increases our investment options to a longer period of time, maybe 1 year or 2 years, which would increase the yield on that investment. And so it's just a matter of bringing that back before the Finance Committee for us to calculate what those long-term releasing of funds may look like, and if there is an availability for significant investment to increase that, then that's what we want to look at.
Anything further, Mr. Parsons?
No, sir. I can move on.
Okay.
Item C, under C1C, is the financial policies and procedures, and there's an amendment proposed by the Finance Committee. This is on page 31 of your agenda packet. This is a result of discussions with PFM and recommendations that have been made. This has been fully vetted by the Finance Committee. The actual changes are shown in red line on page 35 of the agenda. This is related to the use of the regional revenue funds, the 35% of our three silos, and it establishes a working capital reserve equal to at least 3 months of the budgeted annual regional CVTA funds. If tapped, the financial staff of the CVTA will develop a plan to restore this working capital reserve to its minimum level over a period not to exceed 18 months. The authority will revisit the level of this reserve no later than June 30th of 2025 to reflect its actual cash flow patterns and expenditure reimbursements. And then item 2 under that bullet is to fund the cost of issuance and other debt-related fees and services and debt service payments undertaken by the CVTA. If CVTA decides to debt fund projects, the ratio of sales tax revenues portion of the regional CVTA funds will be a minimum of 2.0 times to annual senior lien debt service. So these were both results of, as I said, conversations amongst the Finance Committee and PFM. These are recommendations from our financial advisor team. And the Finance Committee is recommending action to approve these amendments to the financial policies and procedures as presented.
All right, any questions, any discussion? Mr. Thornton?
Mr. Chairman, I think I brought up some issues before, it's kind of related to aspects of this particular motion and policy. And one of our conclusions is looking at what's best for the CVTA in the long run is we've been so successful thus far, and we have also done it in increments. And we haven't necessarily rushed anything, but I want to advise you to use the word, we don't want to be premature on some of these items that I see in this particular item. And I just have some concerns that we may be going a little bit rapidly on this item. I just think maybe we need to be a little bit more timely and give a little bit more time to some aspects of this. It would be my opinion that that would not be deleterious at all to the CVTA. And I just think that I like, and not just I, but I think we've been so successful thus far, and I kind of like how we have done it in increments. And as I have looked at some of the items on page 31 and other things, a lot of things can be supported, but by and large, when we look at what we're getting ready to do, it has me allayed my fears that we may be a little bit too swift and rapid on this one. And so, in the area of transparency and all that, for example, I think this is something that we're very close, I believe, to hiring an executive director. I think that person should be involved in this. And definitely we are not against bonding, but I just think that I'm concerned about the time interval there. So my suggestion would be, let's kind of wait a little bit on this. And in fairness, and again, in transparency, I don't think I could support this item as is presently scripted.
Any more comments, discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll.
I think what we're trying to do here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is at least prepare us down a path that if the CVTA decides to issue bonding in the future, that they can do that. And prep us, not saying we have to, not saying we will, but actually prepare us to be able to do that. Am I interpreting this correctly, Mr. Cartwright?
Yes, sir.
And so it's not about saying, we need to do this right now. It's about saying, when the time comes, we were prepared. And that's all that this is about. I have the utmost respect for my colleague, Mr. Thornton, and his opinion. But I also think that whoever we hire as executive director takes direction from this authority, not the other way around. They will advise us, certainly, but they won't tell us what to do. And so I don't see where it makes a difference whether we have an executive director appointed or not. But that being said, I'm hoping by the end of this meeting, we may have a recommendation for an executive director. And so the whole purpose for moving this forward was to prepare the CVTA for the future. I wanted to make sure that that's clearly understood. It's not about saying we have to issue bonds right now, or issue bonds in 6 months, or issue bonds in 2 years. It's about being prepared to say, we've put all the steps in place to do it if the authority decides to do it. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Spoonhour.
I'll follow up, Mr. Carroll. How does this prepare us more for that? It's kind of lost on me, because it wasn't the finance committee meeting, but by not doing this, how are we not prepared to issue that?
Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Spooner, that's a great question. I think my advice would be that right now, the CVTA has adopted financial policies and procedures. That's the black line in here. Right now, that the policies and procedures for regional revenue are slim to none. If you look at what is crossed out in terms of what exists right now in the policies and procedures, it doesn't provide much detail at all. What this amendment does is add some clarity into what is meant by a working capital reserve, meaning you're setting up a 3-month reserve, the amounts of that, how it needs to be replenished, the details of what a working capital reserve actually means for the CVTA. And then the other item is establishing that debt ratio for the event that the CVTA decides to move in that direction. Right now, that is not specified in the policies and procedures. So as Mr. Carroll said, it doesn't commit the CVTA to anything, but it does outline what the approach will be when the CVTA is ready to do it, according to the policies and procedures document.
Follow-up question. And I think PFM is here today,
Yes.
and I think they could probably speak to this. Is this actually as part of what we would need to establish? Is that correct?
I would say that it gives the CVTA the guardrails to consider all options, particularly when it comes to the next time you're considering the full scope of projects to fund. So, the policies are not meant to serve as, how much you ought to issue for the first time, or, that you must issue that at some period of time, but it does give you kind of the end range of the capacity of what you could be looking at as far as funding the projects. So I think it just sort of serves as the additional tool to give you financial flexibility when you're evaluating project lists.
Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, our colleague, Mr. Thornton, I do think we have been working with this incrementally as we've gone forward. We've gone through this, we've hired PFM to gain their advice and this. We've had it before the Finance Committee numerous times. We've had it before the full CVTA for presentation before. So this is not something we're bringing new. This is really, as I agree, is just setting up the guide rails so that we can proceed when the time comes. This is not committing us to anything, but other than a policy, and a policy can always be changed if we need to make some adjustments for some reason down the road. This is not like a bylaw. This is a policy position paper. So I would support the approval of this.
So my analysis of our current situation, I think Mr. Carroll has stated that this does not lock the authority into making decisions today, right? But just prepares us. However, it seems to me that Mr. Thornton has some reluctance because he believes that we don't have the benefit of the personnel that might be in place. Is that correct, Mr. Thornton?
And some other areas in here about, some other items on 31 that I have some concerns about that I raised previously. I just think, here again, I won't be repetitive, it's not just the executive director, but I'm talking about, what's in the best interest. And I don't see that we can't bring this up again after we look at it again, and maybe if there's a chance for revision. So I'm just saying that, it's not deleterious in our opinion, to the CVTA in a way.
And I will say, Mr. Thorne, we will not negotiate what will need to be revised in what we see today. But I think maybe I will propose this, that we may benefit from this maybe being tabled for a meeting. Is that, would that be helpful, Mr. Thorne?
Mr. Chairman, what we have done in the past has been rather acceptable. And there was another group of assistants who kind of looked at this from the various and sundry localities and brought also back after having surveyed this themselves. They've been very helpful to us. And I don't know whether we have done that with this particular amendment. Maybe we have. I don't recall that we have. But that would be my thrust there.
Parsons.
Mr. Chair, we got the direction from Finance Committee. Upon their recommendation, we sent this out to the Finance Director's Work Group. Immediately after the Finance Committee met last to bring this recommendation, and got no response from anyone in that capacity. So I can say that we have reached out and did the work that the Finance Committee recommended. Did not get any recommendations one way or the other.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Carroll.
I don't see an urgency on this. We can defer this for another meeting. I'll make a motion to defer to the next meeting.
So the motion to table, defer to the next meeting.
Second.
There's been a second. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, it sounds like to me that, that it would be helpful if the various jurisdictions, if they don't have a comment, just say, no comment.
That's why we're deferring it.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. There's a motion to defer to the next meeting. Okay?
Mr. Chair, may I ask a clarifying question?
Sure, Mr. Parsons.
Is it the authority's desire for this to go back to finance for any reason? I think Finance Committee made a recommendation. I'm just trying to understand what staff should be focused on with this item.
Mr. Chair.
I was going to say, Mr. Carroll, I imagine we will benefit from an executive director, hopefully after this meeting as well. I think a review led by the executive director would go a long way in consultation with the localities as well.
I agree.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Parsons is
Yes, sir. The next item on the agenda is the FY24 administrative and operating budget. This is an item, again, as Mr. Peterson mentioned, that was fully reviewed by the CVTA Finance Committee at its last meeting in June. What is before you, there is actually an updated sheet that some of you may have picked up. We can certainly pass that out if you did not. It was out by the agenda items. But essentially, what this shows is the fiscal year 23 operating budget in the first column, the actual expenditures to that 23 operating budget in the second column, and then the proposed FY24 administrative and operating budget in the third column. There are a few notes to highlight there, but the main points that I wanted to communicate here are that the Finance Committee had recommended a number of items to be updated with this operating budget, and those are to make sure that the actual expenditures for FY23 were reflected in that middle column. That is what the handout shows, is the actual expenditures as of yesterday, I believe, from our finance team. The second item was that there was an item under public engagement, under administrative, there's public engagement task item. That did say 35,000. The Finance Committee recommended reducing that to 25,000. And then we added in and made sure to reflect bond preparation services under professional services in the amount of $55,000. This is actually an item that is coming up on the agenda today. I think the last item to highlight is that legal counsel has requested, and Finance Committee is fully recommending a fee adjustment. That is shown under professional services as well, to reflect the services that legal counsel has provided and is continuing to provide to the authority. What we are showing at the bottom of the page, and I can certainly try and provide some clarity on this. As you know, the authority has not, in the last fiscal year, the authority did not have an executive director in place. It had budgeted for that executive director position under administration and staffing. As you can see, there is some carryover from FY23 due to that, mostly because of that position not being filled. So the proposed budget at the bottom is just under $1 million. The actual budget in new funding for this year would be almost half that because of the carryover that will be coming from the last fiscal year. So we also are establishing, and this was a discussion item with the Finance Committee as well, a working reserve, which is shown there at the bottom of $166,000, which is 20% of the operating budget. Up until this point, the authority has not had a working reserve to provide some consistency and clarity in the event that unforeseen expenses arise in terms of making sure that the authority continues to operate and do the things it's supposed to do. So Finance Committee discussed adding this working reserve amount from this point forward is the idea. Mr. Peterson, I'd be happy to take any additional insight from you as the chair.
No, I think you explained this very well. Of course, the item, the $55,000 item, we're still going to address that under item F. The increase for legal services, I think, has been very justified. So did the Finance Committee. That the services provided have been increased without increasing the payment for them for several years now, and that is appropriate. So we feel like that this is a good budget to approve. And the Finance Committee has recommended of it with the changes as have been shown today.
I'd like to add to Mr. Peterson's comments that we had a lengthy discussion about this at our Finance Committee meeting, so it was discussed thoroughly. Any more comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I believe Finance Committee, that is the motion.
That is the motion. That is the motion to approve the FY 2024 administrative and operating budget, and the Finance Committee's recommendations on amendments. Is there, I guess I can just call for the vote. Is there a roll call?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Firestein.
Sir. Dr. McGraw.
Aye.
Mr. Atkins.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page. Mr. McClung.
Aye.
Chair Stoney.
Aye.
Senator Hashmi.
Aye.
That concludes the roll call for that vote, and the motion carries.
Motion carries. Move on to item E.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for proposals for bond counsel. This is really, at this point, an administrative and direction-giving action. We had if you recall, it was earlier towards the establishment of the authority, we had an RFP out to request proposals for bond counsel. The action requested today is really oriented towards gearing up for that deliberate understanding of issuance of debt and the actions that the authority may take for this coming year. So the action requested is to actually withdraw RFP 2022-02, and instruct the staff and legal counsel to develop a new request for proposals for bond counsel.
No motion necessary, since this is a recommendation from the Finance Committee. Any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And Mr. Parson, before we move on, I wanted to just speak to some of the items that we've covered already before going to item F. And I think would be a benefit to the authority that after our discussion today about an executive director, that an executive director, I think, puts in writing a finance or fiscal strategy moving forward. That is, I think, inclusive of, the discussion about bonding in future years. My conversations with many of the members, there are some who stated that we have been moving along incrementally, and it's time for us to kick this thing in gear. And I think the idea behind this authority was that we would be doing projects in the region, and that is happening here on an individual locality basis. However, if we want to be the authority that we had foreseen at the beginning of this process, we are going to have to stop moving incrementally and start actually putting a strategy together to actually accomplish some of our major goals as a region. And so it's my hope that this future strategy will include additional update to our financial policies, as well as the steps and expectations at the Bond Council and for our investor services as well. I think this guiding strategy, will be helpful for us moving forward, so we don't find ourselves in the pickles that we found ourselves in today. And so it's my hope that if we can put that into the record, that the executive director, which I hope that we will have after today's meeting, will put this strategy into writing. Okay, we'll move on to item F.
Thank you very much. This is an action, again, recommended by the Finance Committee to engage an informal confidential rating review with Moody's Investor Services. This was an item that was recommended and discussed in detail by PFM over a couple of meetings of the Finance Committee. The cost is a single-time fee to Moody's Investor Services of $55,000. That is reflected in the adopted operating budget. I did want to add one additional item to this agenda, to this request. As part of that engagement of Moody's Investor Services, PFM has submitted a task order request to take care of 4 key things, and I'll read those. Preparation of a credit assessment presentation to explore likely credit rating outcomes, preparation of the credit presentation for the discussion with Moody's Investor Services, coordination and scheduling of the meeting with Moody's Investor Services, and Q&A both before and after the meeting, and conducting preparation meetings with our team and stakeholders as needed. This is a one-time task order for $40,000. We can cover that under the adopted budget, under contracted services. There is no need to change the operating budget. But I did want to put that on the table. We have not, in all transparency, we have not been able to address this issue individually at the Finance Committee, just due to the schedule of meetings. But I wanted to put that on the table for consideration today because it is directly related to this agenda item F.
Mr. Peters.
Chairman, I would add that we did discuss the $55,000 in Finance Committee. We did not discuss the, what you call it?
Task order.
Task order from PFM. But you're telling us that task order is covered within our previous authorized budget amounts.
It can be covered under contracted services in the budget.
Mr. Parsons, I wanted to know, for the benefit of the public, is there a process that is informing our engagement with Moody's at this time, or?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair, and I'd ask if we can invite Ms. Joy to share that. She can speak more eloquently than I can about this.
Okay. Ms. Joy?
Yes, what was the question again?
My question was, what is informing the process of engaging Moody's at this time?
We have not yet engaged Moody's. We were waiting for the approval before reaching out to them. But this is part of their standard services referred to as a rating assessment service, where in a confidential manner, we're not seeking a public rating from Moody's at this time if we were to engage, but rather we're engaging in a confidential conversation with them to describe the credit profile of the authority, discuss the pledged revenues that would be put in place if we were to debt bond, and describe all the characteristics of what the rating agency will look at to obtain a confidential rating from them and get their assessment on the credit rating. The whole process would probably be from start to finish about a 3 to 4 month process from the moment that we get the green light and start engaging with the team at Moody's.
Mrs. Spoonhour?
So what we're saying is we're gonna spend $90,000 for us to tell us how we would do if we were to go for a rating. That's right. So we're gonna spend $90,000 to tell us how we think we would do if we were to go for the rating.
They will give you an actual rating itself. It just won't be a public rating. So what it will do is, at the time that CVTA is ready to go to the bond market, it would expedite the process in which we've already had an initial conversation with an agency. We know how they would look at the credit. We'll have a really good sense of what the rating ought to be. And I think at that point, it would be an expedited process.
Do we know what it would take to get the official rating?
That we will prepare PFM can help prepare the authority in preparing the materials, and we know the Moody's criteria, we know what they will be evaluating, so the package will include all the information they would need to make an assessment.
Right, but we have to come back to the board. I'm sure there's an additional fee for that.
There would not be an additional fee to come back to the board. The end product from Moody's would be an actual rating.
Okay.
It will be a confidential one, so we'll just have to be mindful of how we work out the distribution and all that, but we will get an assessment from them in writing of what the CVTA's credit rating will be.
Mr. Chair, as I understand, this is a one-time cost and we will not have to we would have to do it in the future if we didn't do it now. But it's only a one-time cost, is that correct?
Correct.
Gregory?
So, I'm sorry, so the body would go through the informal rating process to become, as a consultation with Moody's, to become informed about what ratings the body might expect if they choose to enter into the public financing market. If they chose to take that next step, would they have to then go back to Moody's and the other rating agencies and obtain formal ratings prior to entering into a bond financing in the public market?
Yes.
And you're saying there's no cost to that?
There will be a cost to the public rating obtainment, yes.
It's a two-step process.
It is a two-step process.
Yeah, and the consultation is to inform the body about what to expect, sort of like what Mr. Thornton was saying, deliberative, step-by-step, incremental, gradual, so that the body is well informed and knows exactly what to expect going forward at each step. That's what I would say.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll?
Do we know what the cost would be for the phase 2?
Yes, we can find that out. That is a published schedule by the rating agency, so we can look at that. The other thing that Moody's will likely do, and we have done this before, is if we work with them in this engagement, they will likely give the CVTA a discount when it comes to the actual public rating process, since a lot of the legwork has been done. I don't think there's a set formula to the discount, but I have seen that happen in the past in our engagement with them. And the one thing that I do want to add is that, you know, it is not uncommon for a newly created organization to go through this type of process. And I would call it's sort of a preparation meeting to the meeting when it comes time to do the debt issuance. It just, I think a lot of issuers find it informative to go through the process in a confidential setting, see how the process unfolds, get a handle on all the criteria and then all the evaluation criteria that the credit agencies look at. So, you know, as a newly created organization, this is a process in which a lot of issuers do engage with the rating agencies.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, Mr. Carroll.
Actually, it's interesting, even to go along with what Mr. Thornton's concerns were with what we were trying to do in the financial policy, actually having this information ahead of time would actually help us to make a better decision on the other measure that was brought forward, which makes it even more crucial to have it done.
Well, my question is, would it be appropriate, but also a smart approach to do this without acquiring any bond counsel?
Mr. Chairman, you do not need bond counsel to go through this process, and I don't think it would be altogether informative. Bond counsel comes in the stages, in the latter stage of a financing to prepare the documents necessary to execute a bond financing. They're not going to inform the rating process at all. It will be helpful as part of the overall consideration of bond financing to engage bond counsel sometime soon, relatively, because they're going to have to begin preparing certain documents to inform those kinds of projects, but they're not necessary for the rating process.
Correct, I agree. The other thing about this process is that because it's more of an informal process, Moody's does not require CVTA to have its legal documents to be submitted. Now, as part of a public ratings process, they will need to see a form of all of the bond documents, but not for this type of review. That they will need an idea of what the structure will look like, what the revenue sources are, but they're not going to require any legal documents. And lastly, the one thought that I was having as the board was having conversations about the policies is that this type of review with Moody's will be another good avenue to test the waters on the debt capacity and how that may correlate to the ratings. So as part of this review, Moody's will be willing to give us different ratings indication based on different leverage scenarios. So we can certainly seek for that input as well. So we can ask questions such as, you know, if CVTA were to have a 2 times coverage ratio, or if CVTA were to have a 10 times coverage ratio, does that make a change in the ratings outcome? That's something we can certainly explore as part of this process.
Okay. Any further questions, discussion?
Mr. Chair, one
Yep.
clarification. As I mentioned in the introduction, the action requested is actually adjusted a little bit. It is not to just approve the engaging in the informal confidential rating review with Moody's at a cost of $55,000, but it is also to include PFM task order number 1 for $40,000.
So a total of
$95,000.
$95,000. All right, that is what's before us right now, is a use of $95,000, and I will say, I think it's important, this is why I made those comments earlier, that we do have a full strategy about whether seeking a credit rating, seeking building out capacity to bond forward. I think with the help of an executive director, which we have been lacking, a full-time permanent executive director, that strategy will inform the work of the finance committee, but also the work of the authority moving forward. So I would ask us to seek that in the future as well before proceeding. So with that, it's time to call the question. So I think this is a roll call vote?
Yes, is this for the item E, bond council, or?
Item F.
This is F.
Mhm.
Okay. Dr. McGraw,
Before I answer, has there been a motion and a second?
Yeah, I think it was a recommendation from Finance Committee, so.
Actually,
Oh, I guess it was an
Mr. Chair,
addition.
because we added to it here,
Oh,
I
yeah,
think we will have to
40.
have a motion on that.
So can we get a motion since the $40,000?
I will make the motion to add the $40,000 task for BFM
So we're full 95.
for the full 95.
I'll second it.
It's been seconded.
All right, I'm ready. Oh, my switch.
Roll call.
Dr. McGraw,
Aye.
Mr. Atkins,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Mr. Thornton,
Aye.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Mr. McClung,
Aye.
Chair Stoney,
Aye.
and Senator Hashmi.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion is carried. All right, that is it for the Finance Committee. Anything else, Mr. Parsons? Yes, sir. All right, we'll move on to item 2 on our agenda, is the CVTA Technical Advisory Committee update, and Ms. Moore Clark.
Good morning, Mr. Chair,
Good morning.
members of the authority. Diana Moore Clark here, the CVTA TAC Chair, second term. I'll be here with you all year.
Bless you.
So we had a couple of meetings this summer. The first I'll highlight is the CVTA Fall Line Working Group meeting held June the 7th. The group reviewed and took action on the addition of non-voting member representatives from the Tri-Cities MPO, our friends south of us, sports backers, FOLAR, and the Virginia Capitol Trail. We thought that having that wealth of knowledge and input from those groups would be helpful to the Fall Line Working Group, and they will now be attending our meetings as non-voting members. During that Fall Line Working Group, we had an extensive update from VDOT on the design build phases, and I would defer to Mr. Riblet if the authority has any specific questions regarding that. I do know that Design 1 is moving forward, and Design 2 is slightly delayed, but also moving forward as well from the VDOT end of implementing that. We did have our first wayfinding plan update meeting. We have a second meeting set for this upcoming Monday, the 17th, where we'll be discussing just some of the next steps and some of the early findings that the consultants have come up with. We have also been, members of the Fall Line Working Group have been working with the Bike Walk RVA Fall Line Vision Plan. And again, that's an update that is really going to really create the sense of places that people go through, maybe seeing where there can be trail art and where there can be family gathering places along the trail. So we really do have a good set of plans coming together to ensure that we have a cohesive, as well as we can navigate the trail as well as things for families to do. So we're really excited about that. We also had our TAC meeting, our regular TAC meeting, and on the agenda today, right after I finish, we'll be talking about Hanover's. Congratulations to them for their locality spa request. Whenever we have spa requests in front of us, localities are spending regional dollars. So we're always excited about that, and we're excited for Hanover for that. So with that, that's all the items that I have. We can go to the next item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we have to approve the CVTA locality agreements for projects specified through enclosed spa agreements requests in County of Hanover, correct?
Yes.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
So motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. We'll move on to the other business, item D of our agenda. The first item in this section of our agenda is the GRTC fiscal year 2024 Regional Public Transportation Plan. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just another overview of our spending plan, so very similar to FY22 and FY23. A memo identifying what our priorities are and looking for approval. So our priorities for 24 are to ensure the stability and maintenance of transit operations to the levels operated in FY23 on page 65 of the packet. Prioritize the return of transit operations to pre-pandemic service levels. We are currently still operating at reduced service levels, and this is due to our operator shortage. Pre-pandemic, we had around 280 operators, looking to grow to 300 at that time. We've kind of stayed stable at 235, which has resulted in some significant reductions in our Pulse and our Route 5 service, as well as some Fulton service 4A, 4B. We actually have been doing a great campaign and really aggressive in our recruiting, and we're looking to hit maybe 250 this fall. So we are going to put service back on Pulse and our Route 5, which is exciting to say. So that is a priority to put service back how it was. We are prioritizing capital requirements. So to go with the local match for our state grants for capital, as well as advanced planning studies for operational capital mobility. And prepare for our expansion initiatives. The expansion initiatives that we have identified in the first regional public transportation plan still sit waiting to be implemented because of the operator shortage. And I'll get into what those are on the next page. As far as our studies, if you look at the map here, we have been working with our phase 1 microtransit. If you guys remember, we went out and looked at all of the jurisdictions, identified it was 30 or so zones that could work for microtransit. Through that process, we narrowed it down to 10. And then we ended up going after funding for 5 prioritized zones that we hope to be implementing this year. The first one rolling out at the late 2023, and the remainder to get in by winter, spring 2024. We are in the phase 2 study, which is the implementation plan for that. And are looking to do additional study, so we're asking for additional $200,000 of FY23 funds to go towards the zones that are beyond the 5 prioritized. So we're reaching out to the jurisdictions again who are not in the pilot zones to see the readiness factor from you guys of looking at what could be implemented next. In addition to that, for studies, we are looking at $50,000 to go through to do our FY25 Regional Public Transportation Plan. And we are asking $50,000 this time because we are doing our transit strategic plan right now, which is about a 1-year process, and we are incorporating the effort of the Regional Transportation Plan to be part of that. And that study will be complete next spring. We're looking about June next year. As far as the expansion priorities on page 67, this is the full list that we had come up with back in the FY22 plan, working with the TPO TAC, Public Transportation Working Group, with all the jurisdictions. And we've kind of just moved the fiscal years out as we've kind of rerun the plan each year. So just going to highlight the 4 that have been identified for FY24 if we're able to get the operator count up, but it is the extend our Route 1A, which is to go to Midlothian Turnpike, the Walmart, on Midlothian Turnpike. And Chesterfield did successfully receive a demo grant for 1 year for this study, for this operation. It is a 1-year funding for that. So we will pilot that and then talk about how to pay for that the next year. The next one is to extend 3B from Bright Point, which is a current end of the line, to a new development, Colebrook on the Route 1 corridor. And then in Henrico, extend our Route 1, which currently ends at Chamberlain and Wilmer, so just across the Richmond City Henrico line, all the way up to Brook and Parham, and looking to go to J. Sargent Reynolds with that extension. Both the 1A and the Route 1, we're looking at doing either in winter or spring of 2024 as we get that operator count. And the last one, which we've had kind of continued conversations about, is extending our Route 9 from Short Pump, Bon Secours Parkway to Goochland to be able to access Sheltering Arms. All of those are not requiring any CVTA funds at this time, as they will just be part of our normal operating service. So as we've done it in practice in the last 2 years, GRTC utilizes the dollars from the previous fiscal year. So we'll be using our FY23 accruals to pay for FY24, just to make sure all dollars are accounted for, since this is a significant amount of our operating. And the amount of operating we're looking for is about $23 million to maintain our current service levels. The capital I mentioned, as far as the match, just helps the localities, because typically we do 4% match. So 2% would be from CVTA, and that's about $500,000. The FY24 plan to go to our transit strategic plan for FY25 is $50,000, and then $200,000 to look at the remainder of zones to see what can be implemented next for the micro transit. So the total amount is $23.6 million, and what we are looking to approve once it's all collected for FY23 is about $33.1 million, looking at the DDOT projection. So that puts about $9.5 million that we will be putting in a reserve to come back and act on as we identify whether it's expansion, additional micro transit, which will go with the additional reserve we had last year.
Any questions for Ms. Torres? Mr. Thornton, and then Mr. Atkins.
Torres, we're very fortunate in the region that we have this new tool called CVTA, and what you just discussed is how those dollars have been used. But I would like to hear very briefly, though, how has this environment, a more infusion of funds, has helped the workforce? What is their feeling? I like to know things like that sometimes. Can you give us a little report on how they are doing, how some of these dollars and changes, how they feel? I'm talking about the workers now, and the drivers, how they feel about what they're doing. That'd be efficacious for me to know that not only is it improving all over, but even those persons who do that work.
As far as like GRTC employees specifically and our operators, as far as the way I guess the CVTA funds were identified, about 23 million of the 33 is going towards maintaining service. We don't think we've explained to them CVTA, but as far as the understanding of the different funding sources, it has not necessarily really impacted them. And I'm mentioning the amount because the jurisdictions did reduce the 50% amount. So what we're looking at as far as the net difference is really about $9 million that we're identifying for expansion. Specifically from, I guess, that amount of money, it has not impacted them. But what we've done, and they have had an impact just to stay competitive within the region for specifically operators for their pay rate, is that we have actually utilized our COVID relief dollars at this time to help increase their base pay. So that did happen in April, and they are very thankful as far as just their quality of life and their cost of living. It was very impactful, and it made us competitive, and that really did have an impact on us being able to increase our operators. And we have like a 50 amount of people in training right now, which is not something we've had in the past, all at the same time. So it really has impacted us. And I think what the impact will be is that it will keep us remaining competitive in the region, and will ultimately let us expand service and have a good operator pool that is continuous with that.
Mr. Atkins.
I just want to express we'd like to be on the table for a future open door policy for our staff to sit down to talk with GRTC about greater input on what's going on and develop a greater understanding of what the strategies are and the future initiative for the beautiful, wonderful, isolated rural county of Charles City. And looking at possibly leveraging some other types of initiatives that we could incorporate and deal with some of the transportation issues, especially for the elderly. So if we could set up something in the future on that, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And we appreciate all that you're doing.
Mr. Chair, I should point out that the Finance Committee did review this in detail with Ms. Torres and did recommend approval.
Mr. Spoonhour?
Mr. Torres, I am a huge fan of the I've been pushing for the microtransit study. However, as it was kind of sort of proposed to us, didn't really understand how it was really gonna be a benefit to us. So I think that's why we chose not to go in the first phase. I have a little bit of a concern about allocating additional funds, $200,000, prior to understanding how phase 2 worked. I know Powhatan's going through the process now. Is there a way that we can see what the outcomes of those phase 2 is before we spend more money on a phase 3, or at least be able to alter the phase 3 so it does, if for whatever, it may be going great, I have no idea, but allocating additional funds before we see how it's actually going concerns me.
I guess conversation amongst the rest of the jurisdictions, how they feel about that, because I mean, it would impact whether we look at their jurisdictions as well for the next phase. Yeah, I mean, what we're doing right now is just getting ready for the implementation. We're going to be setting it up as far as internal as well as a turnkey model, working with our union, setting pay, hiring, looking at Henrico's, which also is Hanover zone up in Azalea Avenue and in Memorial Hospital. Yeah. So that'll be the first one launched, and it actually is a route replacement version too. We'll be replacing our Route 93. So as far as success of that, and definitely will be reporting that out and regularly watching it. And the next one we have identified is probably Chesterfield as well as Ashland, to be launched probably in January. The last two are the Powhatan and the New Kent Sandston one. So as far as watching, I mean, they're going to be done in an implemental, iterative sort of way. So I mean, how would you, would you want to just kind of delay looking at the first ones to see how they're going, or?
I think more, so from a Goochland perspective, looking at the Powhatan's is a very similar design as ours, and seeing how that worked for them, I think it would be beneficial.
Okay, I will say the Powhatan one, we are working with DRPT, and our consultants are looking at it in a little bit of a different way, where they currently are, they will have the traditional on-demand transit service, but we are also exploring how that could be complemented with a more, I guess, specialized transportation version that could go to identify locations outside of the zone, since they are kind of really restricted in the rural access, which as well. So I understand, I guess, that the similarity in the models. As far as, I guess, the rest of the zones, I know like Chesterfield and Henrico have some that they are interested in moving forward with, probably in FY25. So I mean, holding that back for the rest of them, could have an impact.
You at the table?
Well, I just had a comment if no one else had any questions. I didn't expect so much discussion about this, but I'm Zach Trogdon with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. I'll just say kudos to GRTC. I was looking at this and it mentions the transit strategic plan, which was a requirement from the General Assembly. So just so all of you realize, that's been around a few years now, that they're just not working through theirs, but these two, aren't happening in a vacuum, and they'll have to work together to, that transit strategic plan is what we're going to use at DRPT when we look at the funding. So, that and this regional plan work together. So I was very pleased to see them mentioned together. And so just so you all are aware that transit strategic plan is certainly what we are going to base our review of when it comes to working with GRTC to fund some of these initiatives. So just keep your eyes out for that as well.
Awesome. Ms. Torres, I have a general fiscal question here. I know that in previous years, this body has approved, some dollars for the annual public transportation plan. And over that time, I know that, you all have all the funds. My question is, have all the funds been utilized or carried forward to the larger GRTC CVTA revenues? The reason I asked this question, because I know we approved some funds last year, and I'm not sure if it has ever cost roughly, $10,000 to prepare the plan, being there is a lack of expansion efforts underway. So can you give me an update on that?
Yeah, point made. The first one did, since it was the more robust plans. And of course, this one is we didn't actually spend any of the dollars for this particular one, knowing we're doing it with the transit strategic plan as well. So those dollars do remain in the reserve as well and would come back as far as additional studies that would go with them for the regional public transportation. As far as the micro transit, we have been spending those dollars because we completed the phase 1 and are currently going through the phase 2.
Any further questions, comments for GRTC?
Mr. Chair.
Chuck?
I'd just like to provide some background for some of the authority members who may not have been around since day one. As part of the enacting legislation, and I'm just going to read it from the code, GRTC shall create a separate special fund in which all revenues received pursuant, and this is 15%, shall be deposited. GRTC shall develop a plan for regional public transportation within Planning District 15 in collaboration with the Richmond Regional TPO in conformance with guidelines required by this section. And GRTC, this is today, shall annually provide to the authority sufficient documentation showing that the revenues distributed under this subdivision were applied in accordance with authority approval and the guidelines required. So Ms. Torres has provided an update to the TPO before coming here. TPO has signed off on the public transportation plan, as you've heard today. So this is the last step in that annual update, essentially.
All right, is there a motion to recommend the approval of GRTC's Regional Public Transportation Plan?
So moved.
So the motion, second? Second. And seconded. Any further discussion? Call for the vote.
Dr. McGraw.
Aye.
Atkins.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page. Mr. McClung.
Aye.
Chair Stoney.
Aye.
Senator Hashmi.
Aye.
That motion carries.
The motion is carried. All right, that concludes that part of the agenda. Item 2, I think we've been speaking about this during the duration of this meeting, is we're about to go into closed session. And according to my directions, I have to read the following. Virginia Freedom of Information Act, section 2.2-3711A1, CVTA Executive Director Candidate Review. The action request is the motion to convene in closed session pursuant to Virginia Freedom of Information Act, section 2.2-3711A1, for the purpose of discussing candidates for the CVTA Executive Director position. So, is there a motion for closed?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Dr. McGraw.
Aye.
Mr. Atkins.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton. Ms. Page. Mr. McClung.
Aye.
Chair Stoney.
Aye.
And Senator Hashmi.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion is carried. I ask that staff and guests please exit the room.
How about Ms. Nelson?
Yeah, we are going to pause this Zoom webinar and start a new one. We'll let Ms. Nelson in and then continue. It'll just take a couple minutes.